For those of you who aren't familiar with ESASI, our mission is to promote air safety by the exchange of ideas, experiences and information. The idea of these Focus On webinars is to explore areas of aviation safety and investigation that are maybe not so widely known to our members. These sessions were the idea of former committee member Brian McDermott, and they've proved increasingly popular over the years. Brian recently retired from the ESASI committee, but he's on the call today, so I'd like to quickly take the opportunity to thank him for everything he did while he was in post and reassure him that the committee promised to continue with his good work on this and future events. The previous Focus On topics were insurance, protected information, ICAO, communicating with families, and behind the flight deck door. Recordings of all of these are available on our website, which is esasi.eu. Today's subject is safety management systems. This is something that got a very positive response when we first announced it during our annual general meeting at the ESASI seminar in Lisbon back in October. This session has been our most popular to date for sign-ups, with over 400 people registered from at least 65 countries across 6 continents. It's great to see plenty of familiar names on the list at the minute, as well as a lot of newcomers. Welcome to you all. Why did we choose SMS as a subject for this? Well, it's something that's an important part of daily safe operations for most aviation organisations, but maybe not an area that safety investigators have got much experience with themselves. We've got 4 great speakers ready to share their extensive experience on the subject with you. They're Dr. Pete McCarthy, who's Head of Group Human Factors at Cathay Pacific, Yuri Orok, who's EASA's Regulations Officer and DOA, that's Design Organisation Approval Team Leader, Marc Saint-Laurent, who is currently a lecturer in Safety and Accident Investigation at Cranfield University, and last but by no means least, Martin Timmins, the Head of Safety Management at AirNav Ireland, which is the country's air traffic control provider. Each speaker will present for 20 minutes and there'll be 5 minutes after each one for questions, so please post your questions in the chat as we go. And I'll put as many of those as possible to the speakers. That's all of the admin and introduction out the way, so let's begin the main event. Our first speaker today is Dr. Pete McCarthy, who's currently Head of Group Human Factors at Cathay Pacific. We're very grateful to all of our speakers for giving up their time to share their experience with us, but especially in Pete's case, as he's over in Hong Kong at the minute and it's now after 10 o'clock at night. Pete's been at Cathay for over 5 years, but like all of our speakers today, he's got a variety of aviation experience from other roles before that. Prior to moving out to Hong Kong, he was a senior lecturer in human factors and accident investigation at Cranfield University here in the UK, and he's now a visiting fellow there. Before going into academia, he served in the British Army for 32 years, and that included 25 years as an Army pilot and rotary wing aircraft commander in operational military service all over the world. His final military tour was as an air accident investigator with what was back then the Military Air Accident Investigation Branch, and that's the role where I first met him when we did the 6-week Cranfield course together. Today, he's going to give us a presentation called Adaptive Capacity, Proactive Safety Data for SMS. So over to you. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you very much, Paula, for the introduction. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay, and I'll quickly share my screen. And hopefully people can see my screen.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Pete.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for the kind invite to present to you today. And I would like to take this opportunity just to give you a quick overview of how we have added a novel and extremely insightful data source to our SMS. And in particular, I'd like to introduce the framework that I've created in order to hopefully develop the conditions for learning from all operations. And this is one of the key differences between this SMS data source and maybe some of the other data sources that are available. To add context to the presentation, one of the key drivers for creating the framework was in fact the ultra-safe nature of commercial aviation. this quote from Willie Walsh, I think, aptly captures the dilemma that I found. Though this statement was referenced in 2022, it was made in 2023, which was in fact one of the safest years in commercial aviation. However, sadly, 2024 and already now 2025 have served to highlight the safety challenge that we all face. But I'd like to read you just a little bit of this particular statement because it throws up a number of areas for further inspection. So as the Director General of IATA states, he said, accidents are rare in aviation. There were 5 fatal accidents which occurred on 32.2 million flights in 2022, which tells us that flying is among the safest activities a person can engage in. Now, those statistics look absolutely fantastic when you think 32.2 million flights and 5 fatal accidents. So from the outsider looking in, that's a really promising statistic. However, from somebody involved in safety and continuous improvement, my concern is the 5 fatal accidents, because if you were on one of those aircraft or a family member was on one of those aircraft, or it was your organization that was involved, then those are a huge impact on our lives. So really, those 5 incidents are absolutely key to be understood. As he goes on, though, he says that there needs to be careful analysis of emerging trends, even at these very high levels of safety. And this is an area where I think that it was somewhat missing within our SMS. So SMS often captures data that may be a lagging indicator. So we look at reports, we look at accidents and incidents, we look at flight data that comes into the operation, and it's always something that's already happened. It's already something that's gone on, and we're now paying attention to it. So I wanted to try and devise a method that was more forward-looking, or at least looking at current data rather than something that was capturing data in the past. But again, putting this into context, from a risk perspective, we are, and across most of commercial aviation, we are ultra safe. And our risk index scores are generally quite low. But for me, this is also a problem, because to me, this means that aviation safety has plateaued. And now we may have plateaued in an ultra safe condition, we could still be better and we could still be safer. So my goal was to try and work out a method by which we could actually learn more about what's really happening within our system. So this number here, 4%, this represents really the amount of occurrences, whether they be significant, insignificant, but they are reportable occurrences and events that occur daily, potentially within most of commercial aviation. So across most of commercial aviation, if we look at all the research, around 4% of all of the activity that goes on results in some kind of reportable event. And that could be a mandatory occurrence report, that could be an air safety report, cabin safety, engineering safety. It could be flight data that triggers something within our safety management system. And this traditionally, within the SMS concept, is where then further investigation happens. So when something triggers something within our SMS, usually a report or usually some kind of exceedance, then we look more closely at that thing to try and better understand what's going on. But for me, this 4% actually represents the absence of safety, or represents the erosion of our safe system. So absolutely, we need to look at it and we need to really understand it and we need to look carefully at it. But if that 4% represents the erosion or the absence of safety, what is it that represents the presence of safety within our system? And for me, it's really this is the other 96% of the activity. So 96% of all the activity goes well, not necessarily to plan, but it goes well, and it does go well despite all of the challenges, all of the ambiguity, all of the uncertainty, the technical faults, the unruly passengers, the air traffic issues. Somehow 96% of all of the activity succeeds. So what is it that allows that to happen? Because it's the same things that occur in the 4% that make when the system doesn't act as we expect. Well, the same things happen on 96% of the time, but things are managed and processes are worked through. So my view was that as well as looking at that 4%, and as well as throwing effort into investigation and understanding the 4% of our safety reports, exceedances, and other events, let's now focus that same amount of attention on the other 96. Let's look at safety as the presence of something. And it's the presence of this adaptive capacity. And if we can understand what's going on in this 96% of the time, then we can understand some of the adaptive capacity and some of the behaviors that are making us successful most of the time. So what we are in effect doing is trying to move towards capturing some proactive safety data. So we're looking to try and understand emerging risks. So rather than being backward looking, waiting for events to happen and then investigating them, we are constantly investigating the operation to try and see what's really going on in our system and therefore identify the emerging risk that we may be leaving ourselves open to. And in order to do this, then we have to move beyond traditional investigation methods. We have to take this approach that we want to learn from all operations. And if we do that, then we can provide context to our data-rich SMS system. What are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to understand work as done. We're trying to really get to understand what's happening on the front line on a day-to-day basis. And there are differences between work as imagined, work as prescribed, work as done, and in this case, work as disclosed. And for those on the call who aren't familiar with these terms, I'll just give a brief sort of overview. So work as imagined would be how the system or the operation believes work happens. They believe that work happens strictly in accordance with all of the policies, processes, rules, regulations, etc. Now, work as prescribed also fits that bill. So work as prescribed is all of the rules, regulations, guidance, procedures. That's what's written down within our safety management system and within our operations manuals, within our engineering manuals that actually dictate how work should be done. But work as done doesn't necessarily follow those absolutely. Now, people try to. We have really good people, whether it's our flight crew, our cabin crew, our engineers, our cargo workers. They come to work to do a good job. They come to work to do the best that they can. They try to follow our procedures, processes, rules as closely as they can. But sometimes they have to vary and adapt their processes in order to make the system work. So what we're trying to achieve is an understanding of what does that look like? What does that variation look like? What does that adaptability look like? Because if we can understand what people are actually doing rather than what the system thinks they are doing, then we can be safer. And this does take a safety two or a new view approach. So rather than just focusing on the small percentage of times things go wrong, let's try and understand the majority of times when things go right. In order to do this, though, we have to create this psychological safety. We have to create an environment and a culture whereby people are more than happy to share this safety critical information with us. So in looking at this dilemma and in trying to understand how we might actually learn from all operations, I developed this framework, which I called the Adaptive Safety Learning Framework. And this is what I'd like to introduce to you now. And we'll start in the 6 o'clock position and we'll work our way around the framework, and hopefully I can explain the elements to you. So the first thing we need to do in order to understand this emerging risk is create the environment for shared accountability for learning. So this is creating this restorative just culture. So it's going beyond just culture. We need to create a restorative just culture where our culture is all about learning and improving. And this is how we then create the psychological safety for people to speak up. And if we can do that, then we get to start to understand all of the influencing factors, all of the things that shape people's work on a daily basis? What are the pressures they're under? What are the trade-offs that they have to make? What are the demands that they face? And we can start to map all of these influences over our daily routine. So once we've created that environment, what we then needed to do was devise a method, a reliable method, to capture the story of operational success. As I said, 96% of the time, things go well, and they go well despite the 101 challenges that they face on a daily basis. So we needed to devise a method which captures this story of operational success. And this is where our operational learning review came in. So we devised an interview method called the operational learning review. And this is what we use constantly throughout the organization to understand what's happening on a daily basis. And this is what helps us understand work as done rather than work as imagined or work as prescribed. And what is it then we're really trying to achieve or uncover? Well, what we're trying to do is explore, as it says there, implicit knowledge and expand upon explicit knowledge. So what this means is, as I said, our SMS is data rich. We have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of reports, flight data that comes in from the aircraft. All these data points come in on a daily basis. And what we can now do is add context to that data. So all of the traditional data is the explicit knowledge. This is what the system knows because this is the data we receive. What we can now do through this operational learning review is add implicit knowledge or tacit knowledge, the knowledge that's inside our people's heads. So they know how the system works. They know all the challenges. They know all the adaptations. They know how they need to vary their performance to get the job done. So we can now add that new data source, this new tacit data to our system. And that helps us then make sense of the original data that we would get to. And when we talk about emerging risk, this is where we find out what's really going on, because this is where we get to the unknown unknowns. And for anybody on the call who's old enough might remember the great speech that Donald Rumsfeld gave probably 20 years ago now, where he talked about when he was talking about the Iraq war, and he talked about there being things we know, things we know we don't know, and things that we don't know. Well, our traditional methods help us understand things we know. They help us understand things we know we don't know. And this is how we traditionally look at our data. But this method helps us with the things we know or we don't know. So this is the unknown unknowns. This is the emerging risk that we can uncover. And our people hold that knowledge. Our frontline operators hold that data. And that's why we need to go to them to get it. Once we've got this data, we can then have a real indication of the resilience and adaptive capacity within our system. And it says there, centralized control, adaptive capacity. Our system is set up as centralized control, i.e. we have rules, regulations, processes, procedures, and we are highly regulated in the way we operate, and rightly so, because that's what's made us as safe as we are today. But we also expect people to have adaptive capacity. We expect our captains, for example, to solve an issue when there is no rule, there is no process, they haven't trained for it, they've never seen it before. We still need to make them able to deal with situations like that. And this is where this adaptive capacity comes in. So this method helps us understand, well, what does that adaptive capacity look like? Because remember, I said on an earlier slide, it's that presence of that adaptive capacity that is safety in our system. And we continue to work around this system. So this is an ongoing thing. The more we understand about the adaptive capacity, the more that helps us create an environment where people are willing to share this information because they actually see how engaged they are with the process, the more they're willing to talk to us in these operational learning reviews, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the more data we gather. What does that look like for the person on the front line? What's the practical application? Well, what it does is gives them the ability to share their stories of success. And for this, I can give you an example. In the early days, I would go down in Cathay City where I work, and I would maybe grab one of our captains and say, hey, you've just flown back from New York and nothing happened. Can we go and talk about it? And he'd scratch his head and say, oh, but nothing happened. Well, for me, if nothing happened in his mind, a huge amount happened in mine, because he and his crew were able to manage all of the challenges, all of the ambiguity, all of the issues, technical, weather, all of those things. And they were able to get our aircraft safely from A to B. And I want to know all about that. I want to know what that looks like. What were you doing? How did you know what to do? How did you know how to respond? How did you know what to anticipate? And these are then things we can share back into the system. So our people can share their stories of success. The system gets to learn about work as done rather than work as imagined. It helps us identify future risk and adaptive capacity, and it then helps improve engagement and trust. And to date, we've now got hundreds of people across the operation who are trained in this method. So from flight operations to cabin to cargo to engineering, all of these areas conduct these reviews to understand what's going on within the system. In practice, what does it look like? Well, the first thing we try and understand is the context. If we are trying to understand an actual event, then we will include things like sequence of events. We're really keen on knowing the performance shaping factors and influencing factors that have been in play at any given time, what the protective factors we have in our system in order to mitigate some of the risks that may be out there. And then we look at what the learning is, and we look at system learning first. So what can we do as a system to learn and improve? And then what can we do for the individuals to learn and improve? And we'll then come up with some recommendations. And this is very scalable, because this can be done, literally over a 20-minute cup of coffee just to try and understand something quite simplistic, to a full-scale ICAO Annex 13 type investigation, which we've used it for as well, to try and understand what really went on within an investigation. We've used it to understand flight operations. We've used it to help us shape our SMS. We used it extensively to understand well-being, especially during COVID, when a number of our crews were having to do closed-loop operations, so working in isolation. We've used it to understand fatigue and help support our fatigue risk management system, training, and on the ramp, on the cargo, throughout the operation. This is now the method of operation. So what does that mean then from an SMS perspective? Well, what it means is we end up with this proactive SMS rather than a reactive SMS. And I always liken SMS, and I know many people do, to an engine. And the SMS really is the engine that drives our safety system. And it starts with our safety policy, and our safety policy absolutely reflects our new view way of thinking. So our safety policy talks about restorative just culture. It talks about well-being. It talks about psychological safety and all of the things that shape the environment that allows people to share this safety critical information with us. It helps us with proactive hazard identification, because it's actually the people on the front line who are sharing these hazards with us. We can then do proactive risk analysis and try and understand emerging risk rather than try and manage risk that has already passed. It helps us put in more effective risk mitigations for these emerging risks. And hopefully all of that is driven by the wider SMS. And this engine just keeps turning constantly, and we keep feeding information. And the way we keep feeding information really is through our communication. So our communication from the stuff we learn, this implicit knowledge that we learn, is fed into the system. And then the value of that knowledge and what we can do through our analysis and through our expertise, hopefully, is feed that communication back into our training system, back into our risk analysis, and back into our hazard management. And then really underpinning all of that is our safety culture. And it is our safety culture really that powers this engine and powers the whole thing. And something else that's new, and many airlines now are taking this step, is we've also then moved to a risk-based safety assurance method. So we use the IOSA assurance method, and that's now become risk-based, which is far more in tune with understanding day-to-day operations rather than just a tick box sort of audit methodology. I think my 20 minutes is probably just about up. And I've only really given you an overview in 20 minutes of what is a massive subject. So I have included some contact details. So my details are there as an email address there. And Valerie, who I work very closely with, is one of the people who helped develop the operational learning review method that we use. So if people did want any further information, or if they wanted to know more about that, then please feel free to contact us. And that is the end of the presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. That's like you said at the start, it's great that the accident and incident rate in the industry has come down significantly over the years, but of course that's making our job of continuing to improve safety a bit more difficult. But I really like this adaptive safety learning framework, because that seems like a great way to gather useful data to feed into an SMS. And of course, as an engineer, I like your comparison of the SMS to an engine.
Yeah.
So if anybody does have questions, if you want to post them in the chat, if we don't have time to cover them now, we will send them on to Pete afterwards and share the answers on the website later. There's a comment in the chat from EATA who shared a link to the 61st edition of their annual safety report. So thank you very much for that. I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest in that one. And then we've got a question from Kate, who agrees it's a very interesting subject, and she's wondering if there's any particular interviewing techniques that you use when you're trying to gather information from your colleagues.
Yes, so we adapted, and you'll remember this method, Paula. So the piece model, but we've adapted it to really lean upon the building of psychological safety. So anybody who takes part in one of our interviews or learning reviews, everything about it is about making them feel safe, happy to share, treating them as the expert, because they are the expert. They're the person who holds that tacit knowledge that we want to understand, being empathic, and treating them with respect. So this is how the whole thing is framed. Every person we talk to is made to feel like the most important person in the room, because they are the most important person in the room.
Yeah, fabulous. I remember when we were doing the interviewing training at Cranfield, you were always very good at that. So if I ever need tips on interviewing, I'd certainly come to you. Unless there's any last minute questions posted, then just leave me to say thank you very much for that. I'm sure your mug of cocoa must be calling you by now, Pete. So once again, thanks for your time, and have a good evening, or what's left of it.
Well, thank you very much, Paula, for this, and thank you for all of you for inviting me to come and talk. And I'm more than happy to take questions, so please do send them through.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Cheers. Okay, next on the agenda, we've got Yuri Orok, who's EASA's Regulations Officer and DOA Team Leader, and my only fellow engineer on the programme today. He's been with EASA for over 13 years. Before that, he held a couple of different roles relating to continued airworthiness and design organisation regulations in industry in France. And today he's going to talk about regulatory changes in Part 21 for SMS implementation. Now, this is something that's particularly topical, as these EU regulations came into force 3 years ago, and organisations are required to be fully compliant with the regs by Friday of this week. So thank you, Yuri, if you'd like to share your presentation.
Yes, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I will, share my presentation. And now you should see my screen.
We have your speaker notes on there again, Yuri.
Better like that?
Thank you. Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so indeed, I will guide you over the next couple of slides through the changes to the EU regulatory framework for the introduction of SMS requirement, in particular in Part 21, which is the regulation for aircraft design and manufacturing. Then we will have a look at the tools to support this implementation, And the last part of my presentation will be to reflect on some feedback that we can share from implementation oversight. But yeah, first as a refresher and to continue on the example that Pete gave on the engine, indeed it is a really good example that we also take to define SMS, because it is composed of a number of elements per ICAO Annex 19, or number of compartments if you want so. And some of you knows those elements by heart already. They are on the slides. What from EASA perspective, what we needed to ensure was that those elements were transposed in the different EU aviation regulatory framework. And the framework, as I said, for aircraft design and production, so meaning Part 21 regulation, was the last domain, the last aviation domain for which SMS requirements needed still to be transposed. And for this, a rulemaking task was initiated, and it followed its way up to the actual changes to Part 21 in 2022. This rulemaking task, the exercise through it was actually to identify and assess the gaps between what we had at that time in Part 21 and what was proposed by ICAO Annex 19. And obviously, what is about the product-centric approach to manage safety, this was already in Part 21. We have the concept of design, of product design assurance, then the certification of this product, the certification of organization, those organizations designing and producing, etc. Then once the product is in operation, so the monitoring through the life of the product with the reporting system, so about events, as we have mentioned in the former presentation, and as a follow-up, the issuance of information bulletins or even airworthiness directives when necessary. So all this was already in place. What now needed to be added, or in some cases reinforced, because some organizations had it already, was this more organizational view to safety, and this beyond the product safety approach, the product-centric approach, sorry. And this organizational view to manage safety, which needs to be tailored to the size of the organization, to the complexity and the nature of its activities, and all this with the possibility to identify safety objectives, communicate on them, and monitor them over time. So through the performance monitoring and through the evaluation of the effectiveness of the system. Another element which needed to be reinforced, and it is linked to the presentation that we had also before, was the possibility to identify hazards and mitigate the related risks, this before they result into accidents or incidents. And the last element, this positive safety culture, the just culture principle, which is really part of the oil allowing the engine to run properly. So all in one, the changes that we have introduced in Part 21 are basically closing the gaps identified with ICAO Annex 19. In terms of regulation, so in terms of documents, if I may say so, the changes to Part 21, this needed to be introduced through two pieces of regulation, but this is due to our rulemaking process in Europe. But at the end, for the end user, for the reader and the user of Part 21, it does not make a difference. What we can retain is that this regulation entered into force on 7th of March 2022 and became applicable 1 year later, so 7th of March 2023. And from this moment, the affected organization had basically 2 years to demonstrate full compliance with the basic requirements of SMS, of the regulation, and close maybe any findings that we would have issued as authority with regard to the novelties introduced by the regulation. And as you can see, we are now on the 5th of March, so we are at the end of the process where the design and manufacturing organization had to do this exercise to demonstrate compliance to the SMS regulation to their competent authorities. Now, in terms of provision, what you find in Part 21, this slide is an overview of some of the requirements impacted by the formal introduction of SMS in Part 21. As you can guess, because of its title, so a great part of the elements of the management system of an organization appear in the provision 21A239, which is basically the management system for design organization requirements. And you recognize the elements of the SMS principles per ICAO. They appear basically in this requirement. We have a similar requirement for production organizations, and in other domains also you have basically one core requirement where those elements appears. But of course, as a reporting system resources, so the key personnel and the record keeping are key elements of an effective SMS. Those requirements in Part 21 have also been adapted to include those ICAO SMS principles. So this is it for the outlaw, let's say, the rule per itself. But of course, there are tools to support this implementation, and in our domain, in our environment, we would call this maybe soft laws to support this effective implementation of SMS requirements. So EASA has updated and published different tools. One of them, or one set, is basically what we call the acceptable means of compliance and the guidance material to support the organizations in complying with the requirement. And secondly, there is the EASA Management System Assessment Tool, which is a support both for organizations having to comply with the requirements and also for the inspectors having to ensure or to perform the oversight of those organizations, so that both industry and competent authority have a common understanding of what is to be expected through SMS implementation. This management system assessment tool has been amended to include the Part 21 requirement, but it was already existing and now contains the different domains, the different aviation domains requested to comply with SMS. So it's a common document for all the domains. In addition to that, EASA has reviewed and finally recognized certain industry standards which have been developed for the showing of compliance with SMS, in particular in this example, it is the standard for design and manufacturing organizations. So those the slides that I have presented were to give a summary of what is introduced in the regulation from our side and the support to comply with this regulation. So the tools to support. In the next slides, and the last part of the presentation is about some feedback on what we have seen as authority through the assessment and the oversight of the SMS of the organizations. And one example, or the first example, is that too often the implementation and the assessment even of the SMS has focused too much on compliance to the requirement and maybe not enough on the effectiveness of the SMS, meaning on the expected result. And actually, this is a change of mindset which is introduced, or which is reinforced, which is actually reinforced with SMS. We are talking about the safety culture here. And in terms of this shift of mindset, it is something which is really important. It is touching really to the heart of the safety management system, because indeed we are moving from complying to SMS because it is written in the rule, or we can even say because I want to please my authority. Really, this movement toward proactively identify, anticipate, mitigate, accept risks, or restrict operations if necessary. And this is the heart, the core of the SMS principles. And to be able to do so, the management of the organization needs to engage the staff, protect them, support them. Here we are about the voluntary reporting, that the people feel safe to report. And from the accountable manager to every single employee, everyone has to understand their safety role and their safety responsibility. And everyone also through the organization needs to understand and know what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And here we are touching the concept of just culture. One third element of what we have seen through the investigation and oversight is that sometimes some organization had the tendency maybe to copy what the neighboring organization or the friend organization had in place. But it is worth insisting here on the fact that the SMS really needs to be adapted to the size of the organization and to the complexity of its activities, the nature of its activities. Indeed, the hazards are specific to each organization and to the environment. So really, the organization needs to see itself as a system and analyze this system, identify the hazard links to this organization. So basically, as an organization, it is not possible to copy paste what is existing from other, or just buying a ready-to-use SMS, if I may say it so. So there is a homework to do, a self-assessment to do. However, the idea is not about building something complicated. It is the idea is to build on the existing, because some organizations had already some the just culture, the free reporting culture, for instance, was already in place, and there are some processes in place. So it is about building on what is there already. And this leads me basically to the last slide of my presentation, meaning it is not about complicating things or creating something completely new, but trying to have things as simple as possible. The more simple, the most easy to understand, and the most uh, capable to work and be effective. So this is basically the last slide of my presentation. I tried to keep it short, and for sure, if questions are popped up, I am happy to take them.
That's great. Thank you very much, Yuri. It's certainly good to hear a regulator's view on this important subject. Obviously, given Friday's very imminent deadline, I hope nothing in your presentation was a surprise to the people who are involved in Part 21, if there's any of them on the call. Obviously, we will be sharing your presentation on our website when everything's ready, so people will be able to access those useful documents that you showed us in there, because I couldn't click on the hyperlinks on their screen. So they'll be able to get them for there. So we've got time for a few questions. If anyone wants to pop any more in the chat, we already have one from Danilo. So is there anything in the regulation about having Part 21 organisations proactively cooperating with an operator's SMS reporting of some events, especially the technical ones, where prompt responses are required? Because it sounds like the questioner has unfortunately had very slow to zero answers in the past.
So if we have organizations having at the same time they are an AOC, they have a design organization, they are maintenance organization. So in this case, they have corporate SMS. So I would say that the cooperation is by definition in their system. Now, when it is not the case, what we have in the regulation is that the organization needs to cooperate with its interfaces. And as a design organization or as a TC holder, by default, the operator is your interface. So the channels basically to open reporting, voluntary reporting, and any kind of reporting is reinforced through the SMS in Part 21 between the TC holder, the design organization, and the maintenance, the CAMO, the air operator, etc.
Okay, so that's in there. That's good to hear. So hopefully that will improve things going forwards. Another question from Dominique. So in an SMS perspective regarding regulation, is it better to work on events retrieved by the network that could have a safety impact and associated trend analysis to identify safety hazards, or to work directly on hazards that are raised by people instead of events? Everything.
I would say we should work on everything. Because basically what is feeding the decision making from the organization, putting in place barriers or mitigation measures, comes from the data. So the more data, the better. So I would say it's not as or it is both. You should work on all kind of data and then assess actually if there is a trend, on something where actually we could it could lead to an unfortunate event, or if actually there is no issue there and there is no need to report, etc., etc. So I from my perspective, the more data, the more analysis is the better.
Yeah, and certainly just going back to Pete's first presentation, you know, where hopefully we haven't got lots of organisations out there that are generating lots of events and stuff like that. So maybe it is getting a bit more difficult to find the data. So any data you can get is going to be a good thing to feed in, I think.
Yeah. Indeed, it's not about waiting for an event. It is definitely not the case. So it's about being proactive, predictive as much as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's brilliant. So there's no last minute questions. I did notice a few people were still putting questions for Pete, and he did stay on the call for a few minutes longer and answer them there, but there's a couple more come in since, so we'll certainly make sure they get passed on to Pete. And the same there, if Yuri is staying on and he wants to type answers in the chat to any more questions, then please feel free to do that. Otherwise, we'll send them to you afterwards if you need to get off to any other meetings. And
Thank
we'll
you.
take it from there. Thank you very much for your
My
time.
pleasure.
Okay, next up today, it's Marc Saint Laurent, who is currently a lecturer in safety and accident investigation at Cranfield University as the latest part of his very varied career in aviation safety. Effectively, Marc did a job swap with our first speaker, Pete McCarthy, as Marc previously worked for Cathay Pacific as their safety manager for investigations. He's originally from Quebec City in Canada, and he started out flying gliders, rotary wing and fixed wing aircraft in Canada and in Africa. And between that and moving to Cathay, he was an investigator with the Canadian Transportation Safety Board and then Chief of Safety for the Aircraft Services Directorate of the Canadian regulator. And on top of all of that, he's found time for various roles as a consultant with ICAO as well, so a very busy man. Today, he's going to draw on all of his experience to share some insights on SMS, state safety programs, and how this all links with safety investigations. So over to you for the next 20 minutes. Thank you, Marc.
Thank you, Paula. Thanks for the privilege. Okay, I'm going to share my presentation. Okay, and focus on. Let me just try and find it. Bear with me for a moment. Okay. Can you see my my screen?
Yes, we've got the PowerPoint presentation, so it just needs to go into presenter mode. I do know Marc has just taken a bit of time out from running a course at Cranfield this week, so he's got a lot on his plate. Thanks,
Busy
Marc.
day
That's
for me.
working well now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for the privilege of presenting. I'm going to talk about SMS and SSP and how it relates to safety investigations based on what I've encountered. I'm going to do a little bit of the genesis of SMS as it was developed by Transport Canada back in the late 90s and early 2000, and also talk about how it relates to what I call the safety action process, which is what needs to change from our recommendations in order to improve safety. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about SMS governance and what are the sources of evidence that would be useful for an investigator that wants to look at an SMS during their safety investigations, and what kind of SMS training resources could be useful for safety investigators. So when I was at Transport Canada Aircraft Services Directorate, that was the time when my colleagues at Transport Canada, the regulator, were designing or developing what would become the safety management systems as they knew it. And it basically was the marriage of the traditional flight safety methods of ensuring safety with the methodologies of quality from from manufacturing and repairs and maintenance, and as well as upholding everything was based on a risk-based approach. So that was the initial idea that culminated into how SMS was presented for implementation in the early 2000s. There was one diagram that showed the process flow of what would become the SMS. And I find it interesting to refer to it. It's not something that is shown all the time. It was, I think, issued in late 1999 or early 2000. But what I found interesting about that is that it had both a reactive and a proactive entry point that would lead into initial risk assessment and further investigations before being captured by the system. So that I find is a very, very interesting point. That means that even though you don't have an accident, you don't have any damage or injury, you can still have an entry point that justifies an investigation to look into potential hazards and safety issues that needs to be done. And that speaks a lot, because investigating accidents where people have been injured and aircraft damage is obviously very reactive. And that was one of my motivation in joining aircraft services and later Cathay Pacific as a safety manager, to find how, with incident investigations, we could prevent future accidents. And that was my thoughts at the time. So based on that, any results from audits, for instance, as an example, any non-compliance or non-conformance should not just be a tick in the box, but people should investigate it to understand why do we have a non-compliance or a non-conformance, and try and really analyze it so that you can identify and change the processes to prevent those non-compliances and non-conformances as well. That's just an example. We're all familiar with the main components of the SMS, the 4 pillars. So policy, which speaks to governance, basically. Risk, which is tied to hazard identification. Safety assurance, and safety promotion through learning. And that ties in with what the previous presenters mentioned. The question I had is, what is the place of investigation itself within the 4 pillars of an SMS? And at the time I was working at Cathay Pacific, I had joined in 2006. And when there was the introduction of Annex 19 on SMS, my question was, well, what about investigations? Do we need to do more of these, or how do they tie in within the SMS itself? And after asking myself those questions, I found that basically investigations, the main product from investigations is hazard identification. That then leads into the safety management system through the safety risk assessment and mitigation methods. And it does speak to the management of change that is ensured when we implement safety actions towards the continuous improvement of SMS. So one of the ways that I pictured that basically is that being the risk management being at the core activity of the safety management system, and the internal investigations from that we were doing, clearly identifying a hazard that would be entered in the risk register and would be risk assessed, and then the risk owners. We had when we implemented the SMS for the 2009 initial implementation for certification, we had positioned the corporate safety department as being separate in a certain way from the operational departments. And we called the operational departments as the risk owners, basically. So flight operations, engineering and maintenance, cabin operations, airport operations, all the director of these disciplines within the company were identified as the risk owners. And our job as corporate safety would be to help them identify hazards and manage the associated risks. So that was the basic way where we could still have a functional independence from the operations as a corporate safety being independent in a similar fashion that investigation authorities at the state level should be independent from the regulatory authorities. So having that clear separation, but having a role of helping our operational departments identify hazards and manage the associated risks, that was pretty much the core of how we positioned ourselves at the time. So we have different ways of identifying the risks through our incident investigations. Once those risks are entered in the risk register, through the governance of the company, the organization, we had various safety action groups or safety review committees that would review those hazards and risks and make a decision as to what safety actions needed to be done, or would we need to do anything to reduce the risk to a more acceptable level, et cetera, et cetera. And those safety actions would be captured within our quality assurance program. If there's any changes to our procedures or processes and stuff like that, well, we would need to audit them on a regular basis to ensure that they are effectively implemented. And whether through the oversight and monitoring, which is continuous, of our safety data from our occurrence reports and other audit reports and stuff like that, then we would be able to evaluate how effective those measures were in improving safety overall. So that's basically what's behind that safety action process there. In comparing the SMS to the SSP, so those are other questions that I had. In my mind, the state safety program is basically, in the most simple terms, an SMS on steroids at the state level. I would like to see within the state level, they all have the 4 pillars of the SMS that are part of the state safety program. So those activities are very, very similar to what I experienced when I was working for an SMS organization. So again, we have safety investigations that ultimately review the evidence and analyze it, come up with a report with recommendations to identify any weaknesses or to identify any strength that should be reinforced as well. And that is communicated via recommendations, and that leads to safety actions and change. Now, the risk owners, they're the people that are accountable, that have the authority, the expertise, and most often the budget to implement those safety actions. And that's the way that it should be. When we make recommendations, we don't want to force a solution to the risk owners. We want to make sure that they clearly understand what the problem or what the opportunity is, and so that they can do something about it. After that feeds into the change management governance, the safety monitoring, the continuous improvement that is part of the safety management system or the state safety program governance. And that should lead to improvements in the reporting that we have in terms of occurrences of our safety issues. So we can monitor the overall performance through those SPIs. So in my mind, the same system should be replicated at the state level, where those activities, especially the safety oversight and regulatory oversight authorities, have the opportunity to collate all the reports from all the operators and safety aviation services providers. So they have much more data that they can mine and understand what are the emerging hazards, what is the level of safety, is there anything that we need to look into, and also they have the authority to make it happen as well. So if there's any safety action that needs to be done, they should have the authority to make sure that appropriate action is taken. When we talk SMS governance, I mentioned that the corporate safety department within the organization should be functionally separate from the operational management and the operational part. And that's very much the way that it's supposed to be established in accordance to Annex 19 and the SMS manual. With the safety department having a direct relationship with the accountable executive and having a functional relationship with all the directors of all the disciplines within the organization. And at the state level, well, this is a little bit replicated in the sense that the investigation authorities are structurally independent from the regulatory and safety oversight authorities. So some examples of what we could have, how the governance is structured for an organization. Well, you have basically at the higher level, a safety review committee at the board level or at the executive management or accountable managers level. And then you have safety action groups, which are for each of the disciplines like flight safety, engineering safety, in-flight services, cargo or ground safety. So that's the typical way that they would be organized. Again, as you mentioned, the way an SMS is implemented to an organization has to be adapted to it. So if you look at different SMS for different organizations, they may not be exactly the same because they have to be bespokely adapted. Here's another way of, for another example. So you have, for instance, the safety action group for all the operational disciplines of the operator. That operator also has a fatigue management committee that speaks to the fatigue risk management program that they have. And all of that meets on a monthly basis and feeds on the monthly at the airline level, the safety review committee. And then you have an oversight twice yearly by the board safety review committee. So that's an example of a typical structure of how the SMS governance is implemented in an organization. And that may vary from one organization to the other. Now, why consider investigating the SMS as part of your investigation? Well, there's a clear link between SMS and safety performance. How healthy the SMS is functioning will have a direct impact on the safety level or the safety performance of the organization. The thing is that SMS is more than just the sum of its parts. I mean, if you go through an audit and you can find tick the box for all the components that should be present in an SMS, that's one thing. But how well do they function together and how effective they are in increasing the learning and the changes, the continuous improvement of the organization, that's another matter. And that's what you want to find out during your investigation. It's not just whether they have the basic components, it's how those components work together. To the point where the SMS is part of the safety culture of the company. And the thing is that if there's any deficiencies with the SMS, that may indicate issues in the wider organization as well. So some of the artifacts or evidence that you could be looking into in order to evaluate the safety management system is obviously formal documents describing the safety management system in the form of policy documents or procedures, standards, or other technical or training documents of the organization. Audit reports and management assurance reports that are carried out on a regular basis. There could be also formal evaluations that could be done externally, either by the regulator or by a consultant, or sometimes some internal evaluation reports as well. So those are good source of information on the SMS for the organization. Other than that, obviously you have the safety database, the hazard and risk register, how they go about the risk assessments and mitigation, all the SPIs and trend data. You can have a look also at all the management papers, the correspondence, the agendas, the minutes of all those meetings, the safety action groups for each of the disciplines, as well as the overall airline safety review committee. So you could get a lot of information on that. But most importantly, I think that interviews with the key stakeholders, the risk owners, as well as crew and staff at the working level, either individual or group interviews, could yield a lot of very good information as to the level of maturity and how effective the SMS is. You could also consider safety culture surveys and questionnaires. That could be other avenues for evaluating the effectiveness of an SMS. Some of the methodology for analyzing the SMS are around. This is one example where you can, as part of your investigation, you analyze the control measures that are put in place, the risk awareness of the organization, how is the SMS assurances and monitoring, review and audit, and ultimately, what is the learning from experience? Pete McCarthy gave an excellent example of how an organization can learn from day-to-day operations, and that's extremely useful. And that will ultimately affect the safety culture of the organization. What are the attitudes and behaviors of people? Here's an example of an evaluation grid for an SMS, and that could give you an idea of the level of maturity and how effective an SMS can be in relation to its safety policy and objectives, safety risk management, that are related to the 4 pillars components of the organization. So that's just an example that could be useful for your investigations. In terms of training investigators into SMS investigations, having basic knowledge of what an SMS is through ICAO or other courses could be useful. There's also IATA and other audit organizations that provide audit training because SMS is part of the IATA standards, IOSA, for instance. So having knowledge on how audits are conducted and can be effective, and being able to map, where all the components of the SMS can be, that can be useful for an investigator as well. And there are other courses that could be available through training or academic institutions on safety management relating to airline, airport, maintenance and manufacturing, and that sort of stuff. When SMS was first implemented in 2009, the investigation authorities worldwide didn't have that many investigators that had previous experience with SMS. But that has changed over the last 15 years, in the sense that more and more new investigators coming from the industry have had prior experience with SMS. So they have a better understanding, perhaps, of what to look for when they look at an SMS. Well, thank you very much. That's all I have for my presentation. And thanks again for the privilege.
That's great. Thank you very much for that, Mark. Some great information in there for the investigators in the audience as to how and why an SMS can be worth considering during a safety investigation. And that final page of training resources, I'm sure that'll be a big help to those who might be feeling a bit out of their depth with the subject. We've got a bit of time for a few questions. I mean, one just building on that is obviously you have that page of loads and loads of sources of information that could be useful for part of a safety investigation. But have you got any tips for smaller safety investigation authorities on how they might tackle that large volume of data?
I'm looking at just some of the questions. Is there anyone in particular you want me to answer, or should I answer those?
Well, first off, I was just wondering advice for smaller safety investigation authorities on how to tackle a large volume of data.
Large volume of data from the SMS itself. It's I think that as part of the SSP, Usually, the implementation of the SSP is part of the civil aviation authorities, the regulatory and safety oversight. So they're the ones who would be receiving most of the reports and data mining all of that information. So if they have a good system to identify readily the trends and the hazards that are emerging, that would be the best source of information. I see the Safety Investigation Authority not being actively involved in assessing those safety reports that are routinely sent, but mostly doing the investigation whenever it's warranted. I think that the safety program itself, the safety function, the safety assessment function should reside with the civil aviation authorities themselves, not the investigation authorities.
Okay, so the
Does that make sense?
the Safety Investigation Authority can draw on the resources of the state safety program to guide their investigation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's probably a bit less daunting than being faced with going in and asking for all that volume of data. Yeah, that's great.
Right.
Thank you. Right, so on to the questions from the chat then. So appreciate this is investigation specific, but what are some of the areas you'd be looking to understand from the risk owners and crew or staff? What information are you trying to gain from these individuals to evaluate the SMS?
All right. If I understand well, one of the ways to implement the SMS is to engage experts from the disciplines as part of the risk assessment, and having champions within each of those discipline area would be a very good way of having that engagement. One of the things that we did when I was in Cathay is that we had the risk owners lead the safety action groups. The corporate safety function would not be chairing those meetings. So the risk owners would own the safety action groups themselves, and we would only facilitate those meetings. And having champions within each of the disciplines that have some training into safety investigations and safety and risk management was very, very helpful. So that's one way to do that. If I have understood the question well.
Yuri speaking here, I would compliment here because it is about also the role of the, let's say, the managers and the role of the staff. And indeed, what we would like to see is that the senior management, so the owners for the resources, the money, etc., they are the ones signing the safety policy and taking the commitment that they will implement an SMS and they will ensure that people can report freely. And this is one thing that we would like to see from the senior management and from the staff. We would like to see that they are this confidence that actually they can report, and this is what is asked to the staff, is to report. So from the management, giving the possibility to report freely, just culture, and from the staff, report.
Okay, thank you, Yuri. So there's another question coming from Jose. So how do you see the Safety Investigation Authority's role in the SSPs as a data feeder to only keep the independent, or any other active role as establishing safety policies? I think we've probably already covered that.
Yeah, I just would like to add on that I mean, as simply as I can put it, the output from a safety investigation, whether it's carried out internally or by an investigation authority, is the identification of a hazard and communicating it as part of your recommendations to the persons that can do something about it. So in my mind, that's the best output. It's not just for feeding data, it's to identify issues or opportunities that need to be looked at by the risk owners. And I see at the state level, the safety and regulatory oversight authorities as being one of the main risk owners in that sense. So being able to communicate clearly what the problems or what the safety issues are, in the form of a recommendation so that the authorities can actually do something about it, then that's probably the best way of achieving that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Next question. Any recommendations for the safety risk management workflow to investigate the root cause and identify causal factors to be accomplished by safety staff only, and or best to involve frontline leaders and SMEs? I take it that's subject matter experts in the process.
Absolutely. I like the bottom part of the question. As part of the safety investigation, you really need to involve the risk owners and their safety matter experts early in the investigation so that you both understand what's going on and what the problems are. And then they can go back because they have such an understanding of what the problem is, they have a better chance of rectifying it. So involving the SMEs from the risk owners is an absolute requirement in my mind.
Yeah, the best, as you say, the best place people to put an effective solution in place.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's all the questions we've received from now. There's some very useful tips in there. So I see Tony's posted a link to how to investigate SMS from part of one of Cranfield's courses. Thank you, Tony. I'm sure that's a good link there.
Excellent.
And William shared the title of a book that I know he values a lot on SMS. So if people are interested in a bit more reading, have a look at those comments in the chat and make a note of that information. We'll share that with the when the presentation goes on our website. So thank you very much to both of you for those.
Thank you. Thank you for the privilege.
One last. We are just on time, so there's another question there. If we get a chance for the wrap up at the end, I'll come back to that. Mark, if you're okay to stay around.
Yes, I am, yeah.
Okay, but otherwise time's marching on a bit, so let's move on to our fourth presenter of today, who's joined us there. That's Martin Timmins, the Head of Safety Management for AirNav Ireland. Like our other speakers, Martin's got a long history in aviation safety. He's served in the Irish Air Corps. He's continuing the theme of helicopter pilots that we've got today, and that includes some time as a flight instructor and completing over 50 search and rescue missions. Moving up in size of aircraft, he joined Ryanair on the 737-800, and he worked as a line training captain, type rating instructor and an examiner before being appointed their safety manager, and that's a role he held for 10 years before he moved to AirNav Ireland. So he's going to draw on all of his experience, along with that of some close personal friends of his, to talk about the role of a safety manager. Over to you, Martin.
Okay, thank you very much, Paula. First thing I'll check is, can you see my screen?
Perfect, thank you.
And you can hear me. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
thanks very much. I was just going back through my old notes, and I've just started my timer here because I have 20-minute turnaround, so I'll try and keep it as succinct and efficient. And like all air traffic control units, we try and keep things on time and efficiently flowing. I went back to some of my old notes from my Ryanair days, and I saw that in 2013 I attended an ESASI conference down in Madrid in April of that year, and I must say that I found it very interesting. It was great to actually get the feedback from the people on the ground and to meet people and collaborate with people. So my presentation today is basically, I think the three presenters before talked about the toolbox, which is the safety management system and the tools that are contained in the box. What I'm more specifically focusing on is the operator, the guy carrying the box or carrying the can for an organization, which is effectively the safety manager. My role currently is safety manager for AirNav Ireland. And in regulation, you will see safety manager and accountable manager as nominated persons or post holders in an organization. So it's up to me to be responsible for the effective implementation of a safety management system, basically making sure all the tools in the box are being used. And it can be any of those four components from a safety management system, along with the 12 supporting elements of it: safety policy and objectives, safety risk management, safety assurance. So we are measured on that, much like the management system tool that Yuri alluded to. If you go to assess performance, SES, and look at the performance review board, every ANSP within Europe is measured under reporting performance, and it's normally reference period 4 we're moving into. We are measured under 5 components of safety, the 5th one being safety culture, which some of my previous colleagues have already highlighted. So for us, it's very important. We are measured on safety, capacity, cost benefit, and environment. So we are measured, and that information is put out there in the public domain. You guys, as trained accident investigators, you will probably meet the safety manager and accountable manager as part of that investigation. That will be your point of contact, you know, looking at the processes, the procedures, the training, the competency of the staff. So that's basically overall just a quick summary of my introduction. But my feelings after my 30-year journey in safety, and going back to Jim Reason, who we lately lost there in February the 5th, and looking at the Swiss cheese model and how you guys appear on our doorstep when all the holes in the Swiss cheese model line up. I'm trying to give you an insight into the person at the end of it carrying the can for that. So what I would say is that nobody is complete as a leader. There are always something there that you need to work on and some capabilities you need as a safety manager and a manager. But the key point about this delivery of this presentation here is, and this is from an Irish playwright called George Bernard Shaw, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that has taken place. It's very difficult for me here in my office in the west coast of Ireland, nice clear evening here, making sure that you understand what I'm delivering. So hopefully my presentation meets that delivery and meets my objectives of the message I'm trying to get across. Always important to kind of highlight our values in Airline of Ireland. We define them here, and our values are fundamental. Basically, fundamental beliefs are, sorry, I'll just make sure that, fundamental beliefs and guiding principles that dictate behavior, culture, and decision-making processes within an organization. And you can see this acronym here starts off with safety as a promise. But who are we promising it to? We're promising it basically to stakeholders, basically passengers traveling within our jurisdiction. We're promising it to our frontline staff that we will protect them, give them a just culture. We will risk assess, we will monitor, and we will give them the opportunity to comment. And we're also giving it to our commercial aviation partners, whether that be airlines, whether it be GA community and military, that promise that we will deliver safe, efficient air traffic services. I think Pete already highlighted, you know, we're in an ultra safe industry, you know, it's at the lowest level it's ever been at, but still, can we do better? Can we get it to 0, the number of accidents each year? That's every safety manager's dream, is to get there to be no incidents, no adverse outcomes. And throughout those generations, we've moved from different periods. We have done an awful lot to drive down accident rates within aviation through regulations, oversights. But a lot of it has been technology, training, and procedures we've instilled. And why have we done these? Well, we've learned from accidents, unfortunately. We've learned from those failures in the systems where the Swiss cheese model lined up and the accident happened. So we can't rest on our laurels. We can't say, oh, we're ultra safe and we can't get better. The challenge for every safety manager and for you as investigators is to decide what failed in that incident and how organizations can better learn from it and how other organizations can better learn from it. And in ICAO Doc 9859, revision 4, prior to revision 4 and revision 3, it would have gone to organizational era. And now we've gone to a total system era where they look at not only the complexity of the incident. So we sorted the technical problems, sorted the human factors, the CRM. We've looked at organizational failures, but now we're looking at the total system era, how an air traffic service provider, through its collaboration or partnership or working relationships with an airline, with an airport, with a aircraft designer like Boeing or Airbus, can lead to an accident. And, you know, it's for you guys as investigators, what you're looking at is all those overlapping layers and where the system failed in an accident report. I'll always go back to the complete leader, and sorry for putting up pictures of Tom Cruise. He's just, I don't look anything like him, and I wouldn't say that I ever flew an F-14 Tomcat, even though I would have loved to. I ended up in helicopters, which are inherently unstable and inherently more riskier to fly than a jet aircraft. But what I do use is kind of like my development as a leader, you know. When you look at Top Gun 1 and you look at, you know, that's the guttiest move, you're writing checks your body can't cash, you know, all that kind of information that was brought around. As a safety manager, and you start off very early on, you think you have the answers to everything. You think you have your system at a complete level. But unfortunately, that isn't the case. You know, the myth of a complete leader having the intellectual capacity to know everything, having the vision to create these plans and strategies that will deliver safety, and then interpersonal skills to relate to every organization and everybody within the organization. It's nearly a mission impossible. You know, you can't be perfect at everything. You have to develop your skills through time and period, through developing your own competencies and learning. However, I did read a book called a number of books, but one of the books that really honed in with me was this book, In Praise of the Incomplete Leader by Senge and Kona. And they said, all right, there's no template for a complete leader. There's no document that you can use to basically, once you tick all these boxes, you're going to be a complete leader. However, they did identify 4 capabilities of a leader. And what I've used these 4 capabilities of a leader in my role as safety manager. How do I adapt to these 4 capabilities? And the first thing I realized, going back to this Tom Cruise movie, is that, you know, aviation is a risky business. You know, there's no denying it. It is risky. However, we've put in such mitigation, such assurances that it's brought it down to an ultra safe industry. So what does sense making make? So that's one of the capabilities we look at. And sense making is basically mapping. It's visualizing the organization you're in. It's visualizing what the industry you're involved in and seeing, can you see any terrain issues, anything that might from the map give you a 3D overview that you need to improve upon or learn from. You need creativity as well, and creativity is imagining things, imagining what can go wrong, looking at different ways of doing processes, and avoiding complacency. Complacency is the biggest threat to aviation safety, in my opinion. You know, you can't rest on your laurels. You can't get complacent. And I'll just give you an example. I went to the dentist recently, and while I was at this new dentist, I just looked at what he was doing from a sense-making point of view. You walk into his operating room, you're put on the chair, and then you're put on a horizontal position. But when I was in that horizontal position, and normally you look up and he's overlooking you with a big light, and there's another person there and a suction tube. But when you look up in this dentistry, there was a TV. And I went, God, that guy really understands sense making. He understands the experience of the stakeholder, the person using his system, because that will relax them, showing nice videos up on top. It didn't basically ease the pain of the filling, but it did distract me from the issues. And the one thing I look at is when you look at this sense making, and I think Yuri might have alluded to, and also Mark, you know, you don't do it in isolation. If you look at that film, Tom Cruise was in Oblivion. Here was an individual with a partner working in an area on the planet after an alien invasion, and they weren't allowed to go outside a prescribed limited area because if they did, they'd end up dying. However, that was just a false rumor. When he did go outside that area, he identified another person who was doing the exact same job as him and creating the exact same map and sense making. I am very much in the line that, you know, through sense making, you build collaborative ideas. You work in partnership with other organizations to understand their risks so you can transfer them into yours. I know Yuri said that you can't, the person looking over and copying them. For me, collaboration is learning from the best and applying those procedures in your day-to-day business. The next slide I'd like to put up, and the next capability that any leader, so we've gone to sense making to relating, and relating is very important. Relating is basically broken down into 3 competencies: inquiring, advocating, and connecting. So what do I mean? As a safety manager, I have to inquire. And what does inquiring mean? It means listening to people. It basically means listening with the intent of understanding what they're saying. And you might have met people in social circumstances where you're telling them something about yourself, but you can see they're so anxious to give their side of the story, they're not really listening to what you're saying. Advocating is basically advocating to other people, saying, you've listened to their side, now I'd like to advocate my side. And this can be with investigation authorities, with regulators, with stakeholders, with the accountable manager, with the board of directors. You have to be able to communicate at that level. And all the time is basically connecting with people on that level. We go to Rain Man. Here's a story about two individuals, didn't realize he had a brother. And, it's what they said in that. It was a journey through understanding and fellowship. That was the tagline, and the journey is everything. And I do agree with that tagline. The journey to where you are as a safety manager and an SMS system is basically understanding and going on that journey, until you reach that end goal of that. When we go on further with Tom Cruise and we go to his movie, Jerry Maguire, it's all about show me the money. But in that, he related to one person in that. That person joined him in his new company venture. And he had one other superstar on his panel that he related to eventually in the end of the story, and then connected to that individual. It's so important as a safety manager that you connect with your people within your team, within your organization, that you don't put up walls and barriers that stop an effective SMS. The next capability from the incomplete leader that Sanjay and Ancona proposed was visioning. And visioning is basically creating a vision of what the future will be like. And that could be through a strategy, it could be through a program of improvement, or it could be through feedback from what your staff are telling you and saying, in the future, we will do this. In this Minority Report, Tom Cruise tried to use data to predict where the next accident or murder was going to take. And I was delighted to see Pete McCarthy say, proactive safety data. Predictive safety data is very difficult to actually identify and use, because if we were able to predict where the next accident was going to happen, we wouldn't have any accidents. And then it goes into his next movie, which is Live, Die, Repeat, very similar to Groundhog Day. And, this is for a safety manager is, here's a vision. My vision, I'm just going to do everything the same way I did it every day. And I hope things will stay the same. I'll have that really good score in my effectiveness of safety management. However, if you don't keep reinventing yourself, it will stay where you are. You won't go any further. And when we go to inventing, inventing is basically looking at new ways of doing it. Like Pete McCarthy has come up with proactive safety data, Safety 2. We heard an awful lot about Safety 2 in my previous company. Safety 2 was, how do we measure Safety 2? How do we get information back? And there's a lot of work being done at Eurocontrol level with Canzo on what's called SECA, which is basically interviewing air traffic controllers and seeing how they did. Like Pete said, interviewing the Cathay Pacific pilot, after he came back, there was no reports. But what worked well? What didn't work well? Understanding them, structuring the data so you can get a better idea how the system is working. And when we put down to realize a new vision, people usually can't keep doing the same things they've been doing. We need reliable intelligence, and we need it now. So here we go, Mission Impossible. I think it's 9 now at this stage, and now they're talking about AI. AI, very interesting. It's the real buzzword in air traffic control circles and ANSPs. How can we use AI more efficiently? I'll give you one example of how I used AI in AirNav Ireland. I took, since 2007, I've took all the accident reports that have been published on the AIU website here in Ireland. I've taken them all out. I've put them all into an Excel spreadsheet using safety. What were the recommendations? What were the findings? What were the root causes of it? And I ran it in Copilot. And I said to me, I've already reviewed the data myself, but I told AI, review the data and tell me what the biggest threat is to the organization. And it came out with 2 threats. One I had thought of and one we had identified, but there was one that we hadn't seen before, but it was in all that information. So that's how we've used AI in that, on top of all the other data that we get, because as anyone knows, there's a lot of data in the system. Nearing the end of my presentation now, but one movie that I really liked and warmed to, and it doesn't include Tom Cruise, it's Brad Pitt. And as my wife always says to me, any movie with Brad Pitt in it is normally quite good. So if I look at that movie, basically that movie is based on the Oakland A's back in 2000. Oakland A's are an American baseball team. They had a very low budget. They didn't have the same budget that, say, the New York Yankees or Boston Red Sox would do. Billy Beane was the manager of the team at that time, and Billy Beane tried to use, the most effective way. And what he used was sabermetrics. Sabermetrics is basically looking at players, looking at their on percentage performance on base, and using that information, and then using that, he got the best team at the best value and made the playoffs 3 years in a row. And that's just using data and structuring the data and making good business intelligence out of it, decisions. What we try to do with our data in Airline Ireland is export that, put it in dashboards, put it in standard deviations, as Doc 9859 says, but try and use quantitative with qualitative, that's subject matter experts reviewing it, to make good safety decisions. And just carry on then. All the time, I just keep going back. So we've done the 4 basic capabilities that a leader should have, or a safety manager. And that is sense making, it's relating to people, it's inventing, and it's visioning. However, what I will always say to you is that it's based on the human. I use this here, a few good men, and a few good men means everyone, a few good men, a few good women, whatever it may be in your organization. As a safety manager, you have to be able to handle the truth. You have to be able to hear the negative feedback, whether it's from an air accident investigation unit, telling you your system failed here. You did not do that job there. How can you learn from it? But it's also hearing the ugly truths from your frontline staff as well, and from your board as well, where you think, part of the other tagline is that we were supposed to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. And I think that's a good kind of project to finish on, or slide to finish on, in that, you are always trying to make it better, so that you provide a safe environment for the pilots, the cabin crew, the passengers, the general aviation users, and the military users who are using your system. And hopefully, as Albert Einstein once said, if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough. So hopefully I've explained it simply to you and made it engaging for you. And that completes my presentation with 50 seconds left, Paula.
Fabulous. Let me just switch my timer off before that interrupts us. Brilliant. Thank you very much for keeping to time. I'm very impressed with all of the timings going on today, and that's fantastic stuff there. Thanks, Martin. I really had no idea before we started the planning for this this session that Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt were such fans of safety management systems.
Yeah, I have it personally from them. Very well. But Tom Cruise is an avid pilot. Yeah.
Yes. So you've provoked a few good questions there. So first off, thinking specifically about your current role, really, how did AirNav Ireland integrate its SMS and get agreement on risk ownership with their partners in airport operations? So the airport operator, aeronautical information, meteorological information, ground handling, and so on.
Okay, so we collaborate. Sorry, we collaborate a lot with our airports. So basically, we have definitive lines what risks are ours. However, our risk can overlie with an airport authority. I'll give you one example: airfield lighting, airground lighting used for aircraft taxiing out to runway holding points and all that. So there was a really good discussion with our airport authority. Who owns that? It's a shared risk, because they're responsible for the maintenance, but we're responsible for the use of it and basically directing our pilots and to the holding point. So for us, we have clear lines of what's under our safety management system, but we would have regular meetings with our airports, with our MET providers, and we also share our reports. So if we have, in the air ops side, it's called an air safety report. On our side, it's called a TOCI. We will share that TOCI with the airport so that they're included in the risks that we see. So I give a weekly report to our airport partners in this country.
Okay, that sounds like a good approach there. The next question, early on you mentioned the concept of assessing safety culture, and in the experience of the person asking the question, understanding an organisation's culture is difficult, and even measuring it in a meaningful way can be even harder. Safety statistics often don't help. So do you have any good or bad examples of how this may be done, either from quantitative or qualitative perspectives?
Okay. So I hate saying that, I hate using this word, but a survey, safety culture, every 2 years, well, every 5 years, where we have mandated within our SMM manual, our safety management manual, that we will do a safety culture survey. We did it in 2023, or 2022 after COVID, but we've reduced that period now down to, we're initiating a new one now. We find the most effective way is through, first of all, surveys, which give us quantifiable data. We then do workshops afterward to review the findings with our frontline staff to say, what did you mean by this? And it's not necessarily anyone identified in it. We then use a third-party Eurocontrol to deliver the survey, so it's free of management. And this year we're partnering with Ostro Control and NAV Canada, and using their survey methodology, so we'll be able to benchmark against others. But I have to say, Paula, the most effective way of measuring your culture from a safety manager's point of view is going out and talking to your frontline staff, talking to other operators, what they see of you. And it can be under the framework of workshops, it can be under the framework of safety committees, but sometimes it's best just to have it over a cup of coffee, you know.
Yeah, the in-person approach can be very effective.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. You get in a few comments praising a fantastic presentation there. Next question from a fellow safety manager there. So in their experience, the most difficult thing to do was helping employees in a psychological way. Most problems come from people's attitude and behaviour. So in this one-to-one approach that you advocate, have you got any tips on that? How do you see problems with attitude and behaviour and cope with those?
It's very interesting, and I don't know is the question specifically in around one area, but we have here in AirNav Ireland, we have an employee assistance program, which is run by Human Resources, which has really good stuff on stress, fatigue, inappropriate use of psychoactive substances and all that. We think it's really good. But we're also on a program now of mental well-being, looking at, you know, how our air traffic controllers rest in our facilities, you know, looking at mindful pathways. Like if you go to, I'm just trying to think of an airport I was in recently, Amsterdam, you'll see a wall going along to one of the terminals, which is just covered with ferns and natural water. It's that mindful spaces we're trying to create within our buildings. We are also looking in the air ops side of the house. They have peer support groups, which is basically trained professionals within the peers, trained in, I suppose, coping strategies, etc. We're looking at introducing that into our organization. The problem is for psychological illnesses or anything like that, it's just depending on the person to put their hand up and engage with someone in that way. But I would say we're on a journey now, and that's one of the journeys that I would love to see a lot more done on in our, not only in our organization, but as an industry on the whole. Like, you know, because you do find after an event, you know, you investigate it, you talk to the individual, and he said, I was suffering from stress. You know, family had broken up, marriage had broken up, I was dealing with separation, you know, and why didn't you declare inability? Well, I didn't realize I was suffering from stress until after the event. And sometimes when you communicate that to ops managers and your accountable managers saying, why didn't we've designed this procedure for people to declare stressed or fatigued, but why didn't they do it? And the story that I always try and do, these things don't manifest until the incident. They were underlying there. And then when the incident happens, then the individual puts up their hand and says, you know what? I shouldn't have gone to work that day. I should have stayed at home, you know.
Yeah, and hindsight's a great thing, but yeah, I think that's a great approach. You know, it's for everyone's benefit, not just for this particular aspect, working on the safety management system to encourage that support network and looking after the emotional well-being of people as well as the physical welfare.
Yeah, Daniel, sorry, I just see that question, Daniel. I just in relation to culture, safety culture, you know, and what I was trying to say, if you go out and get buy-in from people, what I found from staff representatives, if they see something, they raise an issue with you. If they see nothing happening, they lose faith in the organization. They lose faith in the safety culture of the organization. However, if you then action it and they can see the outcome of it, are you engaged with them and telling, look, sorry, I don't have an answer to that yet. It's been brought to board. It's going for budget approval, and keep them engaged. And that's what I mean by communications, Danielle, is just engaging with people and telling them what's happening and keeping them informed. And that helps the culture. I remember the UK CAA used to look at what's the measure of a healthy safety culture. It's like something 5 reports per captain per year. We used to use in a previous organization. But I don't know, is that really a good measure? I think, yes, a good, healthy reporting culture is good, but what are the confidential reports? What are the voluntary reports you're getting outside of those that are mandatory? Sorry, I don't know, Daniela, does that answer it?
Yeah, I think, definitely trying to keep this up front and, develop that culture before you needing to do too much investigating and data gathering is going to be a good thing. Yes, and Yuri's just agreeing there, the feedback loop is very important, keeping people involved. So that's, that's great. Thank you. No,
Thank you very much.
We've had some great questions there. We do have a few minutes left. If anybody has additional questions that they'd like to put in the chat, we still have Martin, Mark and Yuri online. If you have any extra questions from them, I see Mark's been busy answering a lot of questions in the chat there. There's one thread which has ended with Jose. We were talking earlier about you could use the state safety program as a safety investigation authority. You could use the state safety program to inform you about the SMS and areas to investigate, but just querying almost a bit of a conflict of interest there. Maybe if the safety investigation authority is required to investigate the regulator and the effectiveness of the state safety program. I don't know if, Mark, you want to say anything about that, or is that an issue to take offline with the people that have been in that discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see any conflict of interest as long as the roles are clearly delineated between the Safety Investigation Authority and the regulatory authority. I mean, there's been cases, and indeed, I think it's fully within the mandate of investigation authorities to, whenever it's necessary, to investigate how well the regulatory and safety oversight is carried out within the state. And I think that it's not always pleasant, of course, because it does result in tensions between two government bodies. And so there's that aspect to take that into consideration. But it seems to me that the role of safety investigation authorities in identifying hazards, communicating them through recommendations to whomever is in the best position, including regulatory and safety oversight authorities, to take care of those, doesn't engage them any further than that. And that's what we had in mind when we ensured that there was a clear separation between the corporate safety department and the risk owners. So I see the civil aviation authorities as being just another risk owner, basically. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's just keep like you say, keeping those differentiating lines and the
yes. And that does not limit any scope for dialogue and exchange and communication in the process of it. And in fact, I think that it would be well worth considering engaging the regulatory and safety oversight authorities early in the investigation, so that they understand what we're looking for, and they understand if there is a problem, they can attend to it as early as possible and have safety action taken in the end rather than a recommendation.
Yeah. One more question come in that's to anyone that wants to answer. any thoughts about the latest accidents in the US? Is it considered a failure of the SMS, generally speaking? I mean, personally, from my point of view, I don't feel it would be appropriate for us to be discussing ongoing accidents that we don't have all the data for. I don't know if any of our speakers have a view that differs to that.
I would agree with you, Paula, from my perspective, and I'll leave it at that.
We'll let ourselves be informed by the data from the NTSB.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sorry,
Paula,
Martin, you were saying?
Yeah, Paula, all we did was we did a PowerPoint with the bare bones facts of the event and shared it with our ATCOs and our staff. Just a short, but no conclusions, no root cause, no nothing. We just put it out there for them to see, but we didn't come to any conclusions. Just
the facts that are in the public domain.
Yeah, but I would say as part of our own, because we're an air navigation service provider, we did look at our procedures and we did look at our risk assessments to see do we have any exposure to something similar like that kind of event.
Yeah, and certainly within Rolls-Royce, we would do the same. You know, if a competitor with a large gas turbine had an event, we would look at the public information and just say, well, from what we can see there, do we think there's anything we need to take action on, and then keep on top of information that comes out. You know, it's another useful source of information for your safety management, isn't it? But I certainly wouldn't want to get into speculating on causes at the time.
Absolutely, I would agree with both of you, because it's you always have to look at it from your own perspective. How could this happen to us? And that's the proper way of doing that. Now, early in the game, you don't have all the facts, you don't have all of the understanding, but going through the exercise of identifying potential hazards and opportunities to prevent this from happening from your own perspective of your own organization, I think it's a healthy way of doing it.
Yeah.
I must say, Paula, I do feel sorry for investigators now, because when I started off, there wasn't anything like Twitter or X now, all those kind of different mobile platforms now where people will comment on an investigation, will do posts on YouTube and come up with a conclusion outside of the state investigation. So I do feel sorry for any investigators currently, because that is always going to be a challenge. The public already have most of the information prior to the event, the report being produced.
Yeah, and clearly there has been a sequence of events that have led to this unfortunate accident. So if the safety management systems had operated absolutely perfectly, then should we have been able to prevent them? You know, let's gather the evidence and look to get those barriers back in place. Another question for all, are there any recommendations on safety promotion campaigns or training plans to increase safety reports from frontline employees on near-miss events that did not result in an undesired outcome? Do you track or trend near-miss events differently?
I would just like to point to Pete's presentation, because that's what they have implemented. The operational learning review speaks exactly to that. Learning from what's the day-to-day activities are and what is it that makes it, safe and prevents accident. I think that's probably a very good way of doing that.
And to complement also, it is about the safety culture and the awareness of the staff that they can report error, near misses without the fear of reprisal, and that what is, of course, errors are understandable. Then intentional acts are not also acceptable. So that everyone in the organization is aware that they can report freely, and they don't need to be fear that what they will report will serve to increase the safety of the operation of the operations of the organization. When this is understood through training, through, let's say, education, this is a way forward, I would say.
Okay. Were you going to add something there, Martin?
Yeah, I was just we've sent our investigators on a course called Weak Signals with Eurocontrol. It's basically looking at safety to near misses, etc., from a perspective of what went right. So that's the details on that are available on Skybury. But we've sent our number of our investigators on that course, and what we hope to do is we're not calling them interviews, we're calling them conversations with air traffic controllers, with the investigators, seeing what went right and what went wrong. So that's just another area you could look at.
Oh, that sounds useful, thank you. Right, it's now 4 o'clock, so that's been a really interesting session. I know I certainly learned a lot from it. There's been plenty of good advice in there on how to try and gather data for SMS in what hopefully remains an era of few significant accidents and incidents. So once again, I'd just like to thank all of our speakers for agreeing to be with us today and sharing their experience. And thanks to everyone who's joined in the session and asked such great questions to add more value to the discussion. We intend to continue running these Focus On sessions, so if any of our members have got suggestions for future topics they'd like us to cover, please let us know. Contact details for the committee are on the ESASI.eu website. The next event that the ESASI committee are running is our in-person annual seminar in Vienna in Austria on the 14th and 15th of May. We've had a lot of excellent presentations offered, and the technical committee are currently finalising the programme. I have to say it was great to be spoilt for choice when it came to selecting our first choice speakers last week, so it should be a great seminar. The cost of attending the seminar is €150 for members and €200 for non-members. That includes the seminar itself plus a social dinner on the Wednesday evening. More information about the seminar is available on our website, or contact any member of the committee. Thank you once again for joining us at this session, and enjoy the rest of your day.